for this Zoom webinar. First, this session is being recorded for those that couldn't join us live, and then we'll also be sharing with you post-event. We'll email that recording and any other content to registrants within 24 to 48 hours. Attendee names are not visible to the audience in the recording. So in a webinar format, guests don't have their microphones or cameras turned on. So please feel free to enjoy your lunch, stand up, do some stretches, just continue listening and learning with us. Regarding audio, if you are like me and you enjoy live captions or subtitles, they are available. You can turn them on via the CC/live transcript button in your Zoom taskbar. If you're hearing an echo or low volume, please check your device audio in the Zoom audio settings, which is that kind of small caret arrow next to your microphone icon. Please put questions into the Q&A panel, not the chat, so we don't lose them. You could even submit your questions anonymously if you prefer that. I recommend using the chat really only for quick tech help or links from our team. Cameron Collier, our amazing development coordinator, is on this call to help with those needs. Our timeline today is set to give us about 10 to 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. If we don't get to your question in that allotted time, we will follow up by email. With that, let's go ahead and get started. So today we're going to cover smart ways to use the Winston-Salem Foundation as a giving partner, give you an update on fund holder services, and talk about options for making a lasting impact. I'll start by introducing Sheila Virgil to you all first. Sheila is the Vice President of Development and Donor Engagement here at the Winston-Salem Foundation, and she has been leading our team for almost 4 years. Also joining us.
Good afternoon.
Good. Hi, Sheila. Also joining us is Phil Bastron, our Senior Philanthropic Advisor. Phil has been on the team for just over a year.
Thanks, Casey.
Thanks, Phil. All right, Phil, to set the stage for all of us, can you share how many total funds the Winston-Salem Foundation is stewarding today, and roughly how much did we grant as of last year?
Yeah, absolutely. So just to echo Casey's thanks for everyone that's joining us here today. But so as you likely know, the Winston-Salem Foundation has been around for many years. We're, I think, 106 years old. So over that time, we've established many funds. We have over 1,600 funds that are housed here at the Winston-Salem Foundation. And there's many different types of funds. And we'll kind of talk today about the different types of funds that we facilitate here at the foundation. But shortly, if you haven't received your annual report in the mailbox yet, you should be receiving that any day, basically. But you'll see our numbers from 2024 grant making in that report. And so for 2024, this is you're the first to hear because, again, the annual report is just hitting the mailboxes now. But in 2024, the Winston-Salem Foundation sent out over $92 million in grants.
That's phenomenal, Phil. I am always looking forward to the annual report, not only because I see some of the stories here live in action, and it's great to see the pictures and images and the storytelling laid out so beautifully, but just also to always reflect on those numbers. So thanks for giving us kind of a sneak peek on that. Sheila, could you roughly tell us what kinds of community priorities those grants supported most of last year?
Sure. The numbers are very impressive in terms of dollars and the number of organizations that we support. So about 95% of that figure that Phil mentioned, $92 million, is what we call donor-directed grant making. So these are funds that were set up by a donor maybe years ago to help a particular nonprofit organization in our community. Or they might be grants from donor advised fund where the donor who set up the fund directs where the grants go. And we'll talk more about that later in the webinar. But the most common recipients of donor advised fund grants here at the Winston-Salem Foundation are sort of broadly categorized as health and human service organizations, arts organizations, education. Those are sort of the top 3 interests of our fund holders. The remaining 5% of the grant making that we did in 2024 was directed by our community impact team here at the foundation. So those are grants that are made in Forsyth County to strengthen the county and make our community a place where all can thrive. But in total, that $92 million, it benefited more than 2,100 nonprofit organizations here in Forsyth County, but around the country, because people can make grants from their funds all over the country, and provided student aid to more than 600 students from our scholarship funds.
Thanks, Sheila. So a lot of our Donor Connect guests are generally donor advised fund holders themselves. So let's do a little level setting on donor advised fund essentials. Phil, I'm going to kick you off with another tough question in the early stage of this webinar. In one sentence, how would you define a donor advised fund structurally, and who is holding those assets?
Okay. It might be a run-on sentence, but I'll do my best here. So donor advised funds are a really popular charitable giving tool. The reason for their popularity is that they're very flexible, right? So essentially with a donor advised fund, the donor transfers assets to the Winston-Salem Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization, to be used for their charitable grant making over time. So the donor, again, transfers those assets to the foundation, but then has grant making ability to direct grants from that charitable fund to nonprofit organizations that are meaningful to them.
Yeah, those advisory privileges are really a hallmark. Great overview, Phil. Put a hard task on you and you surpassed. Thank you. Sheila, what about the compliance guardrails fund holders should remember, especially around the typical not receiving goods or services related to recommending a grant?
Yeah, that's an important point, especially this time of year. It's gala and fundraising event season, and I'm sure all of us are getting lots of invitations to various events around town. And it's important to remember and to understand that the guidelines for supporting these events with the donor advised fund. So you're welcome to sponsor a gala or a fundraising event using a grant from your donor advised fund. But when you make a grant, you are agreeing that you will receive no goods or services in exchange for that grant. So if you want to actually go to the event and sit at a table and get the dinner, you should buy a ticket separately from the sponsorship that you might give for your donor advised fund grant. So that ticket would be bought from funds out of your pocket, unrelated to your donor advised fund giving.
Yeah, and another example that I often share with donors, just to kind of help clarify that too, is like, so for instance, I could use my donor advised fund to support athletics at Wake Forest University, but I can't receive season tickets to the football games in return for that grant, right? So again, you just can't receive those material benefits that might come from a donation from your donor advised fund. A couple other just sort of things to keep in mind. So a grant from a donor advised fund can't be directed to an individual. Okay, so I could support the scholarship program at Wake Forest University, but I can't send a grant to Wake Forest University and say, this is for, Jane Smith's tuition bill. So again, whereas you can support programs and things like that, you can't support individuals from grants from donor advised funds.
Thanks. That's a really important topic. I think people are thinking about their charitable giving, and a lot of that is being in person, with community at events. So kind of laying out the ground rules for that's really helpful for our fund holders. So Sheila, on that note about ground rules, the Winston-Salem Foundation requires at least one grant of $100 every 3 years to come out of a donor advised fund. Why this rhythm, and what happens if a fund goes quiet?
Well, we do aim to promote, grant making, and we want to prevent charitable funds from remaining unused indefinitely. So we have this policy in place, and by ensuring that charitable funds are actively put to use, we hope to drive some meaningful change in our community and empower organizations and do the good work that is our mission to do. So if a fund goes quiet or a donor hasn't made a grant from it in a while, we'll reach out to that fund holder and encourage them to make a grant. And we can also offer information about organizations that are actively in campaigns or that might be of interest to the donor. So we'll do whatever we can to assist the fund holder in making grants and getting those assets out into the community.
Yeah, such an important part of our field as a whole as a community foundation to make sure that we are stewarding dollars into the community and making sure that people are staying connected to their giving and what matters to them. So Phil, a very common question in the donor advised fund worlds, can a qualified charitable distribution, also known as a QCD, go from an IRA into a donor advised fund?
Sure. So I get this question a lot, right? And this will kind of turn into some alphabet soup here, probably a little bit in my answer to this question. But so for donors that have IRAs and need to take their RMDs and want to direct a QCD to their DAF, right? So if the IRS says that your qualified charitable distribution can't be directed to your donor advised fund, right? So unfortunately, that's not something that would be allowed to go into your donor advised fund. That QCD would have to go either directly to a charitable organization, or it could come to the Winston-Salem Foundation, but to a different type of fund. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go through the presentation. But no, so unfortunately, your QCD can't go to your donor advised fund. And again, that's an IRS regulation. That's not a Winston-Salem Foundation rule. But we do accept a lot of different types of assets that can be directed to your donor advised fund.
Thanks, Phil. So we covered a lot of the basics just now on donor advice fund. Let's talk about how the Winston-Salem Foundation is focused on making giving easier and more informed. Sheila, what are the practical conveniences fund holders are using most right now? In my head, right away, I'm like, oh, single receipts, bundling, online portal. But I think you could maybe break that down a little bit easier than me just brain dumping.
Well, a donor advised fund is actually a great tool for making giving easier. So, as Phil said, you make a contribution to the Winston-Salem Foundation to set up a donor advised fund. So it's one contribution that might end up being the source for many grants that you make around the community. So you have one charitable contribution, there's one receipt that we will issue for that donation. And then you can sort of take your time to make the grants when it's convenient for you or in response to organizations that reach out, whatever is best for you. So one consolidated tax receipt. And organizations, when they receive a grant from you, will most likely thank you for directing the grant their way, but the actual tax deduction comes from your original gift that you made when you set up the fund. We also have this slick new online portal that you can access 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to access your fund, and you can make grant recommendations from it. You can check your balance, you can view your grant history, and we're piloting a new feature of that portal that we call the grant catalog, and this will be a collection of organizations with opportunities that might have something in common, like something around, for example, housing or maybe the arts. And people can access the grant catalog and choose the organizations that kind of align with what they want to be doing in the community.
I'll highlight on that too. The grant catalog, as Sheila mentions, in that pilot mode right now. And what we've done is made some catalogs around Donor Connect speakers. So if you had attended maybe the housing Donor Connect we just had recently, and you want to take a peek at that grant catalog, we would love to share that link with you, get your feedback on it. Getting community feedback is so helpful as we develop tools for our clients. So Phil, besides tools like that, what are some unique advantages of opening and using a donor advised fund with us, a community foundation, versus a commercial donor advised fund host?
Yeah, sure, Casey. So, like I said, donor advised funds are a really popular charitable giving tool. And so again, there's many different organizations and providers of donor advised funds. But I think Community Foundation really offers what we offer here at the Winston-Salem Foundation is a really personalized experience for how you want to be engaged with your charitable giving. So like Casey and Sheila were just mentioning about the donor portal, if you feel really, really confident about the organizations that you support and you're a really experienced charitable giver, you are maybe really familiar about the needs of the community, you have the opportunity here at the Winston-Salem Foundation to simply just log into the donor portal, make your grant recommendations right from your donor advised fund. It's really slick, it's really easy, and you can do that. On the other hand, if you'd like to have some more conversations about maybe what some of the needs in the community are, what organizations are making an impact in areas that are meaningful to you, our staff is just a phone call away, and we're always happy to have those conversations, get you more information about organizations here in the community. This Donor Connect series, of course, helps to do that as well. But it's really kind of a choose your own adventure. Again, if you just want to be kind of independent and make your grant recommendations, you can do that. But if you are looking for some more local knowledge on needs in the community, our foundation staff has a really good finger on the pulse of what those needs are.
Thanks, Phil. That's great. Sheila, I'm going to go to you now. How do you and our team here support fund holders with background on nonprofits and completing that due diligence? And maybe explain a little bit about that due diligence compared to, I was talking to somebody about housing recently, and we realized due diligence is used in multiple fields.
Right.
What does it mean for us?
Yeah, we're not going to do an inspection of your basement. What we mean by that, so when we receive a grant recommendation from a fund holder to make a grant from their donor advised fund, we want to make sure that that organization or that they are recommending is qualified to receive a charitable gift. So with each grant recommendation that we get, we go through a due diligence process to make sure that the organization still has its 501c3 status and is otherwise qualified to receive a charitable gift from a donor advised fund. That's just sort of a routine that we do with all grant recommendations. With fund holders who want, as Phil said, want to sort of go deeper on what's happening in the community around certain areas, we can do research and have done research for donors. We had a fund holder last year who didn't live in the community but wanted to support the community. The fund was from her family. So she wanted to learn more about organizations that are doing good work in the community around helping girls and women. So we conferred with our colleagues here at the Winston-Salem Foundation in Community Impact and who are well aware of the grant making happening around their Women's Fund and what's happening in the community with those types of organizations, and just gave a list of options to this fund holder. So it helped her sort of narrow down and give her some context for what's happening in the community. Like similarly, a donor might want to maybe inquire about an organization, but wants to keep her privacy or anonymity. So we can reach out on a fund holder's behalf and gather information about an organization or a campaign or goals, that kind of thing, and give them to the fund holder so they don't have to work with the organization until they're ready to do so. So that's the kind of work that we can offer here that you wouldn't get from a commercial donor advice fund provider. And of course, we are happy to do it, and it's one of the joys of our work.
To bounce off of that, Sheila, I love being a part of that team that does the work of supporting donors' own interests and helping educate them on current needs and not just needs, but like who's doing really good work in the field. So what are two kind of critical needs areas right now that the Winston-Salem Foundation is working on and where fund holders are kind of coming alongside us in that work? Oh, light went off.
Yeah, I love that question because it gives us a chance to share information that maybe you know a little bit about because you read about it in the paper or you read our e-newsletter. But they are really important right now at the Winston-Salem Foundation. So one is we've recently launched a housing trust fund. This is to help finance the construction and preservation of affordable housing in Forsyth County. The fund will support projects that keep rents affordable for people earning less than 80% of the area's median income. The Winston-Salem Foundation itself has contributed $1 million to get the fund started. And just very recently, I think maybe last week, the city of Winston-Salem committed $2 million to this fund. And so once we get that fund to $10 million, we're going to work with the Self-Help Credit Union to help leverage that fund into a $40 million trust fund to help finance these projects over time. And this is a long-term plan. So this is, 10 years of investments that we're working on. Separately and unrelated, you've probably heard about the unfortunate and tragic budget crisis that our public school systems are in. In response, the Winston-Salem Foundation, together with the Education Foundation of the public schools and the school system itself, businesses in the community, faith leaders, and other individuals, have launched the All In for Our Schools. This is an effort to give community members a pathway for community action to help the schools. So earlier this month, we announced 2 funds that are housed here at the Winston-Salem Foundation. They receive gifts that will provide funding for immediate needs for our students, schools, and teachers. So there's 3 funds I want to draw your attention to. One is called the Winston-Salem Forsyth County Student Success Fund. This is funds we're collecting that will go directly to the school system to purchase items that they have identified as critical that they had to cut from the budget earlier this year. The foundation has made a $500,000 grant to that fund to encourage others to go all in on this fund with us. The second fund is called the Education Foundation Classroom Supplies Fund, and this will provide support that goes to the Education Foundation, and they in turn will provide grants to the schools to buy basic materials that got cut from the budget, like paper and ink and science lab kits and things like that. And then most recently, just this week, you may have seen announced 2 large grants to help help pay off the debt of the school system. So the foundation made a $500,000 grant to this effort. We've had other people come to us that want to help support paying off the debt because it's so critical in order to move our schools forward. So we have another fund here called the Winston-Salem Forsyth County Schools Futures Fund. So that fund will accept gifts that will help with the school's efforts to reduce its debt. And we at the foundation, together with the Education Foundation and the superintendent, are working closely on the agreements to get the debt reduced and provide more opportunities for people to get involved with helping our schools. There's a great resource where this is all put in one place where you can find information about these funds and more ways to get involved, including volunteering. There's a website that's called allinforourschools.org. So if you're interested in that, I encourage you to check it out. And of course, I or any one of us here would be happy to talk to you about these efforts to help our schools.
Thanks, Sheila. I'm very proud to be a team member at the Winston-Salem Foundation working on some of these initiatives and being a part of the work. And a lot of our guests on the call today and those that will be listening on the recording are also actively involved. So I'm really glad to be a part of that network as well. So those of you who have a donor advised fund and have been working with us on all those kind of tasks that we just listed above, thank you. This is often really a first step in working with the Community Foundation, where you have more advisory rights to direct your giving. As a lot of people go through their philanthropic journey and experience and explore their giving interest, we've had fund holders start other fund types as well. Phil, would you give us a story example of that happening?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And like I said, I'd love to just share with the folks logged in here today just about our different types of funds. And Sheila and I will go through that here shortly. So I had a gentleman come to the foundation about a year ago, I guess at this time, that had been a longtime donor advised fund holder and had been directing grants to many organizations. But again, like you said, as he kind of went along his philanthropic journey, he realized that he wanted to do something greater for a very specific cause. So he wanted to make an impact on fine art photography in the community. That was he had some family heritage with that, and that was a passion of his. So he came to the foundation to see what sort of fund he could set up with that. And through conversations, he decided to set up a designated fund here at the Winston-Salem Foundation. So a designated fund is a permanent fund, an endowed fund that'll be here at the foundation in perpetuity. And he chose we worked with him to identify an organization that could carry out, his goals, which ended up being the Rinalda House. And so this is a fund that's designated for the Rinalda House, that is going to pay an annual grant from that fund, again, forever, moving forward for that specific cause.
And I like to think of designated fund as a way to endow your annual support of an organization. So if there's an organization that every year you've been giving to a certain amount, if it's possible for you to leave a fund here at the foundation that would continue that on even after your lifetime, it'd be very meaningful to the organization.
Yeah, I love hearing about people really finding a way to long-term support what they love. I personally love working on stewarding our field of interest funds. Sheila, would you help us with setting the scene in a first example of a field of interest fund?
Yeah. We have a longtime donor advised fund holder who's made lots of grants in the community over many years, mostly around health, but also the arts. Like almost all the arts organizations in town are getting annual gifts from this donor advised fund. But when he became old enough to have to take a distribution from his IRA, he wanted it to help the kinds of things he helps, but he knew that he couldn't put it in his donor advised fund. As we learned earlier, that's not allowed by the IRS. But what we could do with his distribution is set up a field of interest fund here at the foundation that would be used to make grants to organizations he cared about. So we established a field of interest fund for arts and culture here at the Winston-Salem Foundation that every year will make grants to arts and cultural organizations in Forsyth County from a fund that has this man's name on it. So, his donor advice fund, he'll continue to use. But after he's gone and the donor advice fund is no longer in existence, this field of interest fund will be making grants to arts organizations in our community forever. So it's a legacy for him, and a huge support for the arts community here in Winston-Salem.
That's always a great story to hear. Phil, I feel like I wanted to loop back to you as well on the element of a donor advised fund versus a designated fund. Would you say there are particular pros, cons to one direction if somebody's really committed to a single institution?
Sure, yeah. So of course, with the donor advised fund, again, you have a lot of flexibility and control as the donor, right? So you might be supporting an organization this year and decide you want to support an organization, next year or even next week or next month. And you have that ability to change where you're directing the grants from your donor advised fund. That's different with a designated fund. So you, of course, have the ability to choose that designated organization when you set the fund up. But then that is a permanent fund that's going to benefit that designated organization moving forward. So if this gentleman a year later decided, you know what, I actually don't want to support the Rinalda House now, I want to support this other organization, we wouldn't be able to make that change in a designated fund. So there's a little bit less flexibility with the designated fund. But of course, as Sheila just mentioned, sort of the benefit of that is that this is going to be endowed perpetual support for that organization that we as the Winston-Salem Foundation will be able to carry out even after this donor has passed on.
Thanks, Phil. I'm sticking with the word forever in my head when I think of that fund type. Also thinking about long-term forever kind of vibes. If somebody is coming to us and they have a trusting relationship with the foundation and they trust our community impact team to be able to place dollars where they're most needed in the community, especially if they care about 25 to 100 years from now being a better world than how they found it, how would an unrestricted approach work in practice?
I'll take this one. Um, this would be a great opportunity for someone to set up an unrestricted fund if that's their situation. And unrestricted funds don't limit the foundation to a specific program or issue or organization. Instead, the grants will provide, provides the flexibility to the foundation, like our community impact team who makes the grants decisions, to address a wide range of needs as they come up in the community. So the adaptability allows the team to respond quickly to changing priorities and emerging challenges and opportunities within the nonprofit community. So by envisioning both current and future needs, unrestricted funding empowers the foundation to make meaningful and timely decisions that best serve the community now and for years to come. I'm sure there are challenges and opportunities that we can't even imagine today that will be around here 20, 30, 50 years from now. An unrestricted fund will provide the opportunity to address those opportunities when they arise.
And I do just want to add too, so all of these types of funds we've just talked about, designated fund, field of interest fund, unrestricted support, donors could use dollars that are in their donor advised fund and direct those to a new fund to set up one of these types of funds here at the foundation too. So that could either come from a new gift to set up those types of funds, or from assets that are in your donor advised fund and sort of just redirect that into a different type of fund here at the foundation.
That's great, Phil. Yeah. Leveraging the assets that we have committed to giving in the most advantageous way that feels the best for a person, always a good move. So we were branching into kind of the concept of long-lasting impact over the last few fund examples. Let's dive a little deeper into how someone makes philanthropy last, whether that's now or maybe through an estate gift. So Phil, could you walk us through high level bequest and what a revocable trust agreement, what we call RTAs. Can you tell us how they work? How do we work with the donor? How do we work with their advisors, and how they function overall?
Yeah, thanks, Casey. So again, these types of funds that we've discussed here today, you could set up during your life, or you could also work with us at the Community Foundation to make plans to establish one of these types of funds with assets that the foundation receives at the time of your passing. So the way that we do that is we sit down with the donor and we outline these plans through what we call a revocable trust agreement. So what this does is it doesn't create the fund today, but it is a guidebook for Sheila and I and our colleagues in the future as to when and if we receive assets from your estate, this is how we should use them. This percentage will go to set up a designated fund, and this percentage will go to set up a field of interest fund, or however that may be best suited to your interest. And then, we then, again, the Community Foundation has been around for 106 years, and we're hoping we'll be around for another couple of centuries, right? So as these permanent funds continue to be deployed through these funds that you've set up through your estate, the Winston-Salem Foundation will be here to administer those funds to make sure that they're still being used to the intent that you set up at the time that you outlined these plans, and deploy them to the community. While you set this revocable trust agreement up, while you're still alive, you can make changes to this. So you could just if 5 years down the road you decide there's a different organization that you'd like to support through your estate giving, you could come back to us at the Winston-Salem Foundation. We'd simply sit down with you and make those changes in your revocable trust agreement at the foundation, and you wouldn't have to change anything in your will or trust plans with your estate lawyer, right? Because essentially that estate plan is just going to direct some of those assets to the Winston-Salem Foundation, and then we will know how to use those because of the agreement that we've outlined with you. So it's really flexible. And is, again, as Sheila was talking about earlier, just a great way for folks. There's a lot of generous folks on this call, and many of those types of people want to think about, well, how am I going to continue my support even after I'm gone? And this type of arrangement allows for that.
And if I could just jump in, and I think that Phil just touched on one of what I think is the best reasons to partner with a community foundation. I know many of you on the call are regularly supporting organizations in our community, and you have for years. But as you know, organizations can come and go. So while you might set up a fund or now that to support any of the wonderful arts organizations in our community, it might be that in 10 or 20 or 30 years, that organization doesn't exist anymore. Perhaps another one popped up that's similar, but not the same one. But the future Sheilas and Phils and Casey's who work here at the foundation will keep track of things like that. And if there's a designated fund for an organization that goes out of business, we'll make sure those funds get deployed according to what the donor wanted us to do when they set up the fund, either a similar organization or maybe they named a backup beneficiary to benefit from the fund. So we'll keep track of that over time, no matter what changes in the community.
Well, Sheila and Phil, we've covered a lot. And I'm thrilled to say we are getting some great questions in the Q&A. So we'll get to that in just a moment. I just wanted to emphasize a big part of our roles as staff members at the Community Foundation is to hold this knowledge and to make giving joyful and easy. Our audience doesn't need to retain every bit of knowledge because we're here to help guide them, alongside their professional advisors, maybe their family members, to be the difference that they want to see. So, Sheila, to you first, if someone's ready to take their next steps in their giving journey, what should they bring to a first conversation with our team?
Well, first of all, we recognize that every situation is different. That's one of the great things about this work at the Community Foundation is we talk to different people every day who are in different family situations, different family structures, different financial situations. So the conversations will vary. We often will work with estate planning attorneys and financial advisors along with the donor to create plans. And when we meet with you, a good thing to think about in advance is sort of like, what are your goals? What are the things that you value in the community that you want to see continue? I always like to think about like, what are the nonprofits that over my lifetime have really impacted my own life or the lives of people that I care about, groups of people that I'm concerned about, like who have I noticed doing good work? So kind of give those things some thought. And to think about sort of, are you thinking about grant making now? So more of a donor advised fund, like I want to have impact happen now, or are you thinking about like legacy plans, things to happen with your assets after you die? So those are sort of big, broad areas that we like to have people think about in advance. But of course, we are ready and willing and able to begin these conversations wherever you are along that spectrum, and would welcome the opportunity to do that.
Phil, we are getting close to holidays, and it's, as we all know, a great time to support the causes we care about. It's can get pretty busy for somebody to sort through all the asks and the needs coming from our community. If someone has a donor advised fund here at the Winston-Salem Foundation and they are wanting to make grants before the end of 2025, where will a fund holder find the grant recommendation deadline? And can you share that date with us now?
Yeah. So, like you said, Casey, this is starting to get into giving season. So I know a lot of the grant making is going to start ramping up. So make sure if you have access to the donor portal, you'll be able to see the deadlines that the foundation has for this year to get grants submitted to be paid by the end of the year. Those will also be available in our monthly newsletters starting in November. But this year's deadline, if you want to ensure that the grant is paid by the end of the calendar year, this year's deadline to get your grant requests in is December 12th.
Awesome. You heard it here first. December 12th. Get your recommendations in, support your nonprofits, make sure they feel the love over the holidays. So now I'd love to open it up to our Q&A portion for our time together. Just a reminder to our audience, if you have a question, type it into the Q&A feature and it will send it over to myself and Cameron for addressing with Sheila and Phil. And I see we already had a few pop in. The first one, I will toss it to Phil and Sheila, but I also have some insight on it in case you guys want me to jump in. Somebody asked, what percentage of that 92% we were talking about earlier stays in Forsyth County for Forsyth County nonprofits with the grant making?
Yeah, so I think that's what we're talking about with the donor directed, correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Casey, why don't you go ahead and jump in?
All right, I'll jump in. So the fresh data that I have is about 43% of our donor advised fund grants for 2024 stayed in Forsyth County. So that can also be skewed with like individual fund holders who have large assets. Particular corporations we work with can skew that sometimes. So that is excluding any of those outlier fund holders. But in general, we have about 43% staying in Forsyth County. And that's one of our goals is honestly to increase that number of staying in Forsyth County impact. I'm really excited about that work, and I know our fund holders are too. Anything, Phil or Sheila, you want to add to that?
Well, and then just keep in mind that the percentage that is directed by the foundation, of course, then is completely directed to our service area here in Forsyth County too. So when we talk about, there's a difference between that. Remember the donor directed portion as well from the foundation directed portion.
That's great. Thank you. Another donor advised fund question. How much is needed to set up a donor advised fund?
Yeah, I'll take this one. So our donor advised funds, you could set up a donor advised fund with the Winston-Salem Foundation for $1,000. So fairly accessible entry point to start your charitable giving. Of course, we also have donor advised funds here at the foundation that are $1 million funds, right? So we offer a variety of different sort of options for donor advised funds that fit the person and what their goals might be for their charitable giving.
And let me just add that no matter what the size of your donor advised fund, you'll have access to some of those benefits we talked about, of course, the portal, events like this, and the other Donor Connect events that Casey mentioned earlier. It's a great way to learn more about the community and get involved.
Yeah. Kind of on that financial value of a donor advised fund, do individuals top up their donor advised fund annually? How do people give on a regular or irregular basis to their donor advised fund?
I've seen it happen kind of both ways, Casey, like where there's an annual gift. Sometimes the annual gift comes in January and all the grants are made by February. And then there's just not much activity until the next January where the donor gives again. So that's sort of just money in, money out. We have other fund holders who make large contributions to set up a fund and then take many years to grant it out. And sometimes that might be all the grant making they're going to do in their life is what the initial gift to their donor advised fund was. And then it's maybe they've set up a large enough fund that it's an endowed donor advised fund. So it's being invested to benefit the fund. And then they can make grants over time at their convenience when they want to.
And on that note of thinking of like an endowed or a non-endowed donor advised fund, what happens to any donor advised fund when a donor passes?
Sure. So you can always come in and talk to us about what your intentions are with that fund after you pass. Sort of the default generally is that assets left in a non-endowed donor advised fund would go to our community grant making efforts here at the Winston-Salem Foundation. So they'd still be deployed into the community to make an impact. But if you have an endowed donor advised fund here at the foundation, then you have the option to select another generation of successor advisors. So for instance, you could set up a donor advised fund here at the foundation where you're directing grants during your lifetime, and then you could name in that agreement that, okay, upon my passing, my son will become the advisor of this, the successor advisor of this fund, and then he would have access to the remainder of the remaining assets there to direct grants into the community as he sees fit. But always, we're always here to talk about what you would like for your legacy plan for the funds that you have here at the foundation.
So you just rang a keyword for another question, Legacy Society. It was mentioned in a recent e-newsletter. How does a donor join that group?
So the Legacy Society is our way of recognizing people who have made a plan that will benefit the Winston-Salem Foundation. So come to a fund here in their estate plan. So that could be anything from naming us as the beneficiary of an IRA after they've passed away, to a straight out bequest in their estate plan. We also use it to honor people who have set up permanent funds here at the foundation that exist now. So any fund of $10,000 or more that a person has either contributed that amount to or given that amount to or more, they also get invited to our Legacy Society as a member. And we do have an event once a year for those members. It's a nice dinner and an opportunity to hear about some of the grant making that we've done in the community, kind of a behind the scenes look at what's about the work that we're doing.
That's great. Thanks, Sheila. I love this next question. And it's a tough one, and especially in the nonprofit world and all the burdens that can weigh on our nonprofits. How do we judge the trustworthiness and efficacy of a nonprofit and the relationships that we're building with our nonprofit community?
Well, we work closely with our community impact team who has the relationships with the organization and spend a lot of their time, working with the nonprofit community to help them achieve their goals. So, it's through the grant making that we do so they can try out new things that might work in their organization. Of course, there's reporting back to the foundation, but I would say it's based mostly on the relationships that our staff is able to forge with the leaders of nonprofits, become very familiar with what their work is, how they're doing their work, how it's impacting the community.
Thanks, Sheila. Yeah, I think that being as impactful as possible with the assets we have here, learning from community members in the nonprofit space, building trusting relationships, it goes a really long way. And the fact that our development and donor engagement team have access to the technology and software that our grants team is using for grant making decisions, we can see recent information from a nonprofit applying for funding. So we don't have to always go back and ask for new information and make them kind of do double the work. We can at least start from some groundwork that they've already submitted through our grants application process and be able to build some recommendations for fund holders, and not just start from scratch and ask a development team member at a nonprofit for the same thing every few weeks. So that really helps that we're a cohesive team working together on that front. We also have the question of with supporting like the unrestricted work. Somebody's been giving to the Next Century Fund in the past. Is that still applying to unrestricted grant support, or is there a way to do unrestricted grant making support on their own?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I'll just clarify that too. So, of course, anyone could make a gift to our unrestricted grant making through something like the Next Century Fund, and that's where you would make an annual gift. But if you wanted to set up a named permanent unrestricted fund yourself, you could also do that. So that's sort of, I think, so you could set up your own unrestricted fund here at the Winston-Salem Foundation that is named and endowed. And the minimum to do that is $10,000. Gifts to the Next Century Fund are achieving much of the same thing, but that fund is set up more to receive annual gifts and annual support to the Winston-Salem Foundation. Did I have that right, Sheila?
Yeah. So that's a great way. If you want your dollars to go to work, all of your dollars to go to work in the community through our grant making, the Next Century Fund is the best way to do that.
That's great. I also wanted to ask a question that we had. Can somebody recommend a grant to an organization that isn't pre-populated in the fund portal? So if they're kind of starting from scratch with an organization that's maybe very grassroots in another region that they care about.
Yep. So, excuse me, donor advised funds. Although we do our work here at the Winston-Salem Foundation in Forsyth County, you can direct a grant from your donor advised fund to any qualified nonprofit organization across the country. So if that organization isn't currently in our list of organizations that we have granted to before, that's okay. You can still even use the portal and just add that organization in. And we talked about due diligence earlier, so our team would go through and just make sure that's a qualified organization that could receive that grant. And assuming it was, we would go ahead and direct that grant, and then that organization would sort of be on the list next time you went in there to look for it.
That's great, Phil. And the discussions about our nonprofit engagement and supporting relationship growth there. Something that maybe some of you on this call have done is go on a site visit with a nonprofit. Particularly, Marty Pittman on our team is kind of a connoisseur of site visits alongside our donor partners. I'll be actually going on one today. I'm really excited that we're going to go visit City with Dwellings. It's an opportunity for an individual fund holder to get time with a nonprofit institution to learn about recent work, see it in action. It really makes a big difference in your grant making when you are connected to it. And even if it's you want to go volunteer with them, we are happy to be a partner in setting things up and making sure that you have those opportunities. That's one of the big benefits of a community foundation, is that we can get you connected to those resources. Okay, so in the sake of time, we answered all of the questions that have come through so far. If someone afterwards has a question, please feel welcome to be in touch with us. I have one final question of our panelists. So in one sentence, I like doing the one sentence structure. What's the easiest step that a fund holder can take this week?
Well, I would just say there's no need to wait till the end of the year to do your year-end grant making. I'm sorry, this is more than one sentence, Casey. But Phil mentioned that that grant recommendation deadline for donor advice fund is December 12th. That deadline that has to do with a grant getting to the nonprofit before the calendar year ends. From the fund holder's point of view, you've already gotten your tax deduction, so that doesn't really matter to you or your tax situation. It might matter to the nonprofit to have a gift before the calendar year ends or before December ends. So that's why that 12/12 date is important. But otherwise, to give you one thing to do today is to sit down and write out who are the orgs I want to support before the year ends. And, maybe not wait till Thanksgiving, but do it even this month yet. And put it in writing and then go onto the portal and make your grants. You could even put them in the cart now. If you change your mind in a couple of weeks, you can take them out or replace them. But get the process started for making your year-end grant making.
And I'll say, we at the Community Foundation, we're here to really try and facilitate some easy and convenient charitable giving for you. So like Sheila mentioned earlier, every situation is different. We know that everybody wants to make a different impact here in the community, something that's meaningful to them. And just feel free to reach out to our team if you have any questions about anything that we've talked about here today or about your fund or next steps. We at the Community Foundation are really here to serve you and to help serve the community. So we've got up on the slide some photos of our team here in development and donor engagement. You can find this on the website as well, but please do feel free to reach out to any of us on our team.
Great. Thank you so much, Phil and Sheila, for sharing your knowledge with us. And thank you, everybody, for joining us over lunch. Watch for a follow-up email with links, the recording, contact information, and that December 12th grant reminder for your recommendations to come in. Thanks for being with us. We will see you again in 2026 for more Donor Connect events. Take care.